Okay, good evening. I'm very happy to see our audience this evening. And a big welcome to you for coming out to support this event, and a big welcome to all of the individuals, families, parents, and community members that are watching this event on the webcast that is being webcast live. This is an important discussion on safeguarding our children. My name is Sandra Arnold. I'm a graduate fellow and a student at Brown University. My research interests includes historical slavery and issues of justice, including modern-day slavery. I'm also interested in social issues related to the often overlooked in our society, which unfortunately includes children. I'm the co-producer, co-presenter of this event, and co-producer of this discussion along with the Watson Institute of International and Public Affairs. It is our hope that each of you, whether you're in the audience here with us here today or listening live on our webcast, that you will find the discussion this evening engaging, educational, and most important, filled with ideas on how all communities can work together to protect all children from exploitation, whether it be when a protective eye of a parent is close by or not. To accomplish this, I believe in order to accomplish this responsibility, I definitely believe it takes a village of concerned citizens, including neighbors, police, ministers, clergy, teachers, and bystanders with instinct. It also takes instilling in our children a respect for their instincts. Children are some of the most instinctive of God's creations, I believe, and training them to trust their gut instincts is one of the most important things we can do as a member of the human family. Today we have professionals and experts on the front lines of protecting children, and I believe there's much to learn from them and their experience. Our moderator is going to introduce each of these esteemed individuals. But before we move further, I definitely want to thank a few people and also give you a few housekeeping issues. One, this event is being recorded. I think I mentioned that it's a webcast live, but also it will be available on YouTube in a matter, I think, in about a week. So keep it in mind as you ask questions. I'd like to thank the Watson Institute for their support for this event. I'd also like to thank Catherine Dunkelman for all of her support and encouragement. Ross Cheit, did I pronounce your nice
Close.
Correct
Cheit.
me? Cheit? Cheit.
Rhymes with right.
Ross Cheit.
Very good.
And obviously the Watson Institute for International and Public Affairs. Also our co-sponsors, the Center for the Study of Slavery and Justice here at Brown University and the John Nicholas Brown Center for Public Humanities and Cultural Heritage at Brown University. I also want to thank a few institutions and organizations and groups that have been promoting this event. The Child Exploitation and Obscenity section of the Justice Department in Washington, D.C. I want to thank them particularly because this event was kind of birthed out of talking to a few people at this particular section and learning so much about what they're doing and learning so much about, in my opinion, how there's very little awareness of this section and other sections like it at the Justice Department that are doing really good work. Also, the FBI office here in Providence, Rhode Island also promoted this event. The Providence Police Department also promoted this event, and also the Providence Public Schools, along with the Mayor's Office of Providence. So I want to thank all those individuals and all of the offices for promoting this event. Our moderator for this evening is Ross Cheit. Ross graduated from Williams College in 1977 with honors in political economy and a coordinate major in environmental studies. He then obtained a law degree and PhD in public policy at the University of California, Berkeley. He clerked for Justice Hans Lindy, is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Lindy.
Of the Oregon Supreme Court, and practiced law with Duane, Lyman, and Seltzer in Berkeley. He joined the faculty at Brown in 1987 and was appointed to the Rhode Island Ethics Commission in 2004 and was elected chair in 2011. He's currently a professor of political science and public policy here at Brown, I believe at Brown, here at Brown University, obviously. And he specializes in ethics, public policy, criminal justice, children and public policy, and the politics of food. His first book, Setting Safety Standards, Regulation in the Public-Private Sectors, was published by the University of California Press. His most recent book is The Witch Hunt Narrative, Politics, Psychology, and the Sexual Abuse of Children. And I'm really happy to have Ross moderating this event. I'm really excited and very happy to have all of the esteemed professionals here to be a part of this discussion. And Ross, you can continue.
Thank you, Sandra.
You're welcome.
I'm delighted to participate in your event, and welcome to the people who have come. I'll give a brief introduction of each person on the panel, and then I have a series of questions I'll ask people. So let me first tell you who's here. On my immediate right is Koren Garcia, who has 19 years of experience in law enforcement, including 5.5 years as a detective in the Investigative Bureau in the Providence Police Department, and 4 years as a member of the Homeland Security Human Trafficking Task Force. So I will be asking you about what that means. To her in the middle is Lauren Kupersmith. Lauren is a trial attorney with the Child Exploitation and Obscenity section of the U.S. Department of Justice, where she's been since 2016. Before that, she was a special assistant district attorney in Middlesex County. She has a law degree and a master's in social work from Washington University in St. Louis. And most important, she's a Brown alum and my former student. And I'm so delighted to see her again. And our third panelist is Denise Barton, an assistant U.S. attorney in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Rhode Island. She's been a prosecutor for about 15 years, has been an assistant attorney here in Rhode Island for 2 years, having come from, I guess, a similar job in the U.S. Attorney's Office in San Francisco and Oakland. In Rhode Island, she investigates and prosecutes a variety of criminal cases, including child exploitation and fraud matters, and she serves as the Project Safe Childhood Coordinator. I'll be asking you about that. So we have three people who have a lot of expertise here. So what I think I'll start by asking is to have each person really just say something about what their job is and what they do in their job, and then I'll get more to the challenges that you face.
I'm a night shift detective with the Providence Police Department, which means we respond to any felonies that come in. Our job to investigate and refer to the AG's office any cases that need to be charged as a felony. Along with that, I specialize in the special victims cases, any sexual assaults, things like that come in. I'll carry those cases, and any human trafficking that comes in. We have one day detective that works on these cases as well, and then I'm at night. So we work together, trying to keep track of a lot of these cases end up tied together in some way or another, so it's really important that everybody stays in communication and talks about what they're working on. So and then I work with the task force, which keeps me in communication with all the departments in Rhode Island. Gives us contacts outside of Rhode Island and Massachusetts. A lot of these cases cross state lines, and when they do, it's important that we have the HSI contacts or the FBI contacts so that we can bring the cases federal if they need to be.
Okay. Lauren, tell us about your job.
So the child exploitation section is a component of the criminal division in the Department of Justice. And so we are prosecutors, but we're basically a headquarters unit with the Department of Justice. And so we partner with the U.S. Attorney's offices throughout the country to bring our cases. Sometimes it's the U.S. Attorney's offices reaching out to us to provide some assistance in their cases, and sometimes we'll be running the national and international operations and then bring the case to the different U.S. Attorney's office. We also provide advice and training to the field of other prosecutors who are doing this, as well as national and international trainings. And then we also seek to fill the gaps in policy and legislation in the areas of child exploitation with changing technologies. As part of our section, we have a component that does forensic examinations. They're the high technology investigative unit, who are kind of the best in the field, specifically devoted to child exploitation work, who will be experts in these federal cases, as well as also provide advice and training to the field and work on new advancements of technology to help investigate these cases. And so we exclusively do child exploitation cases, that trafficking of images or child sex trafficking or traveling offenses, both domestically and internationally, as well as any other realm of child exploitation comes to our unit.
Can you give us a working definition of exploitation? Does it always mean there's economic activity, or what is it that makes it exploitation as opposed to child abuse?
It does. I mean, it's probably just a broader term than child abuse. It certainly does not have to be economic in nature. There's aspects of sex trafficking that can be a commercial aspect of something of value being exchanged for the sex act taking place. Yep. But for the exploitation, just some child abuse or sexual material happening, for it to be federal, there has to be some interstate nexus or the U.S. to another country nexus. Yep. And so the commercial aspect sometimes provides that, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that. A lot of the child abuse images or child pornography images have some type of interstate nexus just based on the devices that are being used to either create the images or to store the images. But also we would cover a case if an offender traveled from one state to another to meet up with a child, or the child is traveling, or if an offender is going from the U.S. to another country, and there may not be an economic component to it.
Okay, thank you. Denise, tell us about your job.
I am in the local representative of the United States Department of Justice. It's the U.S. Attorney's Office, which is headquartered here in Providence. And I am an assistant United States attorney, which is a federal prosecutor. So I work in kind of two capacities. One, I work in an investigative capacity if there's a case that we're proactively building, and I'll work with federal agencies, the FBI, HSI. On my non-child exploitation cases, it could be ATF or DEA. And then I'll also work with local departments and the Rhode Island State Police to build cases, and also be a resource for them if they have questions as they're working up a case and they just have a legal issue or want to know if our office would consider it. And then on the other side, once a case is charged, or if a case comes to us after an activity has occurred, I'll be the person who goes into court, appears before the grand jury, presents the case, asks for charges to be brought, and then sees it through the end, whether that be a trial and sentencing or a plea and sentencing, and then we'll work with victims along the way. So it's the best job in the world as far as I'm concerned, but it's nice because you wear a lot of hats and you get to experience both policy, victim issues, legal issues, social issues, and it's just really, it's great.
So I think the next thing I'd like to ask, and I don't want to be too rote and just going in the same order each time, so maybe I'll ask you, Denise, what's the biggest challenge that you face in your work?
Reporting, I think, is one big challenge. I think a lot of these crimes go unreported for years upon years. Not sure if this is the biggest, but one that just comes to mind. I think a lot of victims, frankly, don't know that they have been abused because they were too young or disclosures weren't made, so their guardian or parent don't know. There's also a shame component. Once the children do know, or they've been basically groomed, is the term that we would use, to believe that this is appropriate or is some sort of reward or some sort of closeness with their abuser. So I think that's one of the challenges that we face. And then kind of getting people on board with that, just because of the reporting. I think if a parent has learned that something has happened directly to their child, oftentimes they will try and take care of it themselves because they want to protect their child. And as a parent, I understand that instinct, but there's kind of broader implications that would, in my opinion, warrant them reporting it. So I guess that's one thing that does come to mind. There's others.
Lauren, what's most challenging in your job?
I think the advancement of technology in terms of how it impacts this field is if you think about kind of where phones were 5 years ago versus where they are today, not only does every offender carry a computer in their pocket, but every child does as well. And so increasing the access to children, but it's also increasing the access of offenders to other offenders. And so that increases their mobilization and their use of technology, and the technology not only is increasing kind of how they do the crime, but how we can then attack it with the advancement of encryptions and anonymization platforms. It's making the crime itself more prevalent, but also making it harder and harder to kind of get down and go after it.
Detective?
It seems like every time we figure out what they're doing and how they're doing it, they're already changed and they're already one step ahead. You know, that makes it very difficult. And just having enough services for the victims. We do a lot of work with non-government agencies as well to kind of wrap around these victims and try and provide them enough services to keep them out of being further exploited. And sometimes finding enough services is tough.
Example,
yep, Day One's one of the people that I work with all the time. Family Service of Rhode Island's another big one here in Rhode Island.
Yep.
And we have many programs. There's many programs, but getting the kids to engage sometimes, like she was saying, that they just don't see themselves as a victim. They don't see themselves as someone who's been exploited, and if they're not willing to engage in the service, you know, someone's got to want help.
So I don't want to be overly legalistic, but I do want to ask why these cases are so hard to prosecute. And I know there's a story in the Providence Journal today about a conviction in Rhode Island being overturned on trafficking. And I haven't read the opinion, and I know it's a state opinion. But Denise, are these really hard cases to prosecute? And if so, how come?
I'm not familiar with that case. I have not read the Projo today. But I think they're like any other case that you need to put the work in to get all the details marshaled before you move forward.
Is it harder to prove trafficking?
I haven't found that it is. I think the people that we work with, that I've been fortunate to work with, as far as investigators, whether it be state, local, or federal, in all of the offices I've worked in, come to you with a sense of what has happened, and then you build the case. Or if it's a reactive case, they come to me with what they've already put together. And I have found that there are sometimes a few things we need to tease out to put the case together, but I haven't found them hard to prosecute. A knock on wood, I'm trying to go through my history in my head, I have not yet had a not guilty on one of these cases. I have found most of them have pled. It will happen, because in everyone's career it does. But I think it's because once you get to the point of having the information at your fingertips, you and the investigative team that you work with just know how to put it together. I don't find it yet. It's work, but I don't find it harder than other cases that I've done. And I've done a pretty broad swath of cases in my career.
And Lauren, in your cases, are images often part of the case? Because it seems to me when you have physical evidence like that, that probably makes it easier to prosecute.
It does. I mean, sometimes the cases will start with images because you're aware of an image, and then you work from there to try and identify who's involved in it. And sometimes you are not starting with an image, but then you're seizing devices. And so on the devices, you then find ample evidence to prove your case. But I think also with the technology changes of encryption and anonymization and just like streaming that didn't used to exist, people aren't storing as much as they used to. And so sometimes that's making it harder. And the technology advancements that they're trying to stay one step ahead of them does sometimes make it difficult. I'm not necessarily sure once you have your case to actually prove your case, but I think to actually find the people to begin with, I think the changes in technology make it more difficult.
Oh, interesting. Detective?
The cooperation of the victims sometimes can be kind of touch and go. When they're first recovered, a lot of times, you know, the first couple times you meet with them, they're not going to tell you the whole story. They don't know you from a hole in the wall. They've been lied to. They've been exploited. A lot of times their first couple of disclosures will be very protective of the person that's trafficked them and not involve them. So it's real important that when they do tell you something, when they give you something that's true, that you find some type of evidence that corroborates that truth, so that down the line, when we go to trial, the defense attorney is going to try and paint them as a liar because they lied several times. But the more points, the more things about their story that you can prove with pictures, videos, some type of financial evidence, something that just makes the case really strong.
I know one of the goals here in having a forum that reaches people in the community is to think about what parents can do. So I'd be interested from each of you what kind of advice or thoughts you have for parents who are thinking, you know, how do I navigate this world and what should I keep in mind from people who deal with these cases? You have advice for parents?
Talk to your kids, keep an open line of communication, watch for changes in their behavior, the people that they're hanging out with. You know, cell phones, like she said, everybody's got a computer in their pocket. And they know how to use them better than we do.
Yeah.
All the time, you know?
So what's the advice?
Be vigilant.
Oh,
be
vigilance,
vigilant, you know, don't allow them to be able to keep that device from you. If you know, at night they have to leave it with you. Allow you to go through it, allow you to have their passcode. I know kids want privacy, especially teenagers, but you just have to be careful because there's people out there that they're counting on that.
Yeah. Lauren, advice for parents?
Yeah, I think know what technology they're using. Don't just assume it's, well, that's kid, they know that tech. I don't need to know it. Download the apps yourself. Google them. Figure out what they can do, what they're capable of. If the kids are using them, other offenders who are trying to access kids are using them. And so you have to know them as well. And I think parents are very good at teaching stranger danger about the creepy guy who's standing on the corner. But with technology changes, that stranger could be in the pocket or on the computer and on the phone. And so kind of understanding the applications that are out there, ways of communicating, and knowing them yourself. And so you're not just being blind to what your kids are using and what's happening on those devices.
Your parental advice?
I think what Lauren's point earlier, as far as the advancements in technology making the work difficult at times, I think that's the same with parenting, as you just alluded to. I think then there's also kind of two buckets. I guess I would view it as far as protection factors, where you do have the stranger danger, the creepy guy who's nearby, who's a neighbor. You also have the online people, and I think parents need to think about both of those things and talk to their children about their community, the people that they talk to, what's private, what's not private. I know with the children that I've been involved in interviews with who have been abused in various ways, I think sometimes parents not talking openly about body parts, not talking openly about what is private and what is not private, and just not talking generally with their children about their bodies and kind of the changes as they're going through adolescence and puberty. I know I have young children, and I speak openly about what each body part is, and it's not because I feel like my children running around talking about, genitalia. It's because, God forbid, something happen. I want my child to be able to tell me, Mr. So-and-so did X or Miss So-and-so did Y, and be able to describe it. So I think that's one bucket. I think as far as the online component, I think there's a need to explain to your children, like be open with them and keep the communication open, but also just explain to them why you're trying to keep their phones and why, you know, what can happen to them. I mean, we all were teenagers. We all knew everything when we were teenagers, and our children will do the same. So I think it's nice to kind of explain to them, like give them the information so they have the power to hopefully make some good, or if not good, not horrible decisions along the way.
So this really is a related question, but in some way all three of you respond to child abuse, right? So the question is about prevention. The question is, and that's not what you're doing, but what are your thoughts about what we as a society could be doing so that fewer cases are ending up with you?
I think, as she said, education. I think that's our key, education of parents, teachers, anybody who's an educator, and the kids themselves. You know, we need to educate everybody.
I think, just to the point of prevention, I think there is actually, we are responding, there's no doubt about that, and we're responding to tips and building cases, but particularly Lauren's unit, and she could speak to that more, there's huge initiatives that take part from the headquarters, from the Department of Justice, within the Child Exploitation Obscenity section. I'll let you speak to them, and they may not appear to be on the street prevention. There are, I know we do some kind of going to libraries and speaking to people, or making ourselves available to speak with parent groups if somebody so wishes. But on a higher level, her group is working with people to figure out websites to take down, and that shuts it down and stops it, so then the next level of victims are not attacked or assaulted, or shutting down a technology or something. So there are preventative efforts happening at 30,000 foot and also 30 feet, which you obviously in a better position than I would be to speak to that.
Well, I think part of our section's job is to kind of find the holes that needs to be filled for a prevention aspect, whether it's a legislative fix or it's the investigative side of kind of recognizing an international or national trend that's going on in the technologies to kind of work at that higher level. And that's one of the reasons that the Department of Justice is set up the way it is, to have that headquarters unit that can kind of take that time to look at the broader picture of things. Like a lot of my investigations, I'll be working on the investigation. I have no clue where it's going to land. It could land in Denise's district. It could land in some other district. It may land not in our country. But we're looking at kind of what the trends are, working with our international partners to kind of figure out what fixes we can do prevention-wise. And then the other thing that we do a lot of is working with the providers, working with the internet service providers, or working with the technology when we see a certain trend come up of a new platform that offenders are using, working with a lot of times the companies that have this platform that's being used are designed for a completely different purpose, and they don't want these offenders on their platform either. You have a program that's meant for online business meetings or something that then becomes utilized by offenders, and they're finding a way to kind of target children and use it to advance their goals. And so working with those companies to figure out how they can identify the threats that are going on in their platform, and working with us to stop that being used, but also help investigate what is happening on there. And so the technology balance is an interesting one, especially on the legislative side, also of the kind of the concern of privacy that's happening in today's world, and providers who are pushing back, trying to promote a privacy world, which is all great, and there's certain benefits to that, but at the same time there's aspects of what we do that we don't want privacy to get in the way of making our jobs harder and making it easier for offenders to find other technologies to use. And so I think prevention-wise, that's a lot of what our section does.
So you mentioned legislative fixes, and I'd like to ask each of you if you could suggest a legislative change, some change in policy or law that would, you know, from your point of view, make the world better in addressing these issues. What would it be? Detective?
Well, I know we've had some fairly recent legislative changes that have allowed the trafficking to be readily prosecuted. I know that the thought process now is a lot more victim-based than before. Prostitution was prostitution, and people were arrested and charged with it, and we have a deeper understanding now for the dynamics of that. And the legislation has caught up to speed with that, and that's good.
Statute of limitations, maybe? No? Well, maybe the lawyers have more of a sense on that. Is the statute of limitations a big issue for either of you?
I haven't had it.
No,
No.
we're in a pretty good position
Yeah.
right now for
Yeah.
statute of limitations.
come?
And I think that that's one area that we've caught up with what the
Right.
issues were of like delayed disclosure and kind of just the nature of these crimes. And I think
Being
child abuse.
debated in Rhode Island right now.
So
I
federally.
mean, it was a big issue in the last legislative session, and a bill that many people supported didn't go to a final vote, and it's back. And, I mean, there's a sense that the statute of limitations is too restrictive in Rhode Island, that some people think that.
Having never practiced in state court in Rhode
Yeah.
Island, is it a 2-year or 5-year? Is it?
I think it's 5 years after 18 or something. And they want to make it at least 15. I think Massachusetts is at 15, do you know?
I'm not sure. I've never run into the issue myself, personally.
I thought
so-
Massachusetts recently got rid of theirs,
We
but
got-
if it was like
yeah.
26 years,
Oh,
they
and-
needed some extra corroboration.
And I'm sorry, the dispute in Rhode Island's on the civil side. We got rid of it on the
okay.
criminal side in Rhode Island.
Okay.
We have gotten rid of it on the criminal side.
Yes.
We're one of, I think, 8 or 9 states that did that. So, so there is this case now that's getting a lot of publicity in Rhode Island. You probably have the most sense of this one, which is Richard Gartner, a sex offender who has served a long sentence, originally had a very long sentence that was shortened, and now he's back in the community. They were unsuccessful in holding him civilly in Massachusetts, and the neighbors are furious, and they're protesting
Yes, they
outside
are.
his house, and it's an awful scene. What's your perspective on this whole thing?
Yeah, I can understand the neighbors, issue with him living in their neighborhood. He had some pretty serious crimes.
He did.
I can't, I don't know. I would have an
It's
issue
too
living in the neighborhood too, but
Yeah.
I mean,
But they have
he
to live
served his
somewhere,
time,
right? But also they have
and
to
he's
live
got to
somewhere,
live somewhere,
right?
exactly.
Right.
And
I mean, Warren, what's your view on these restrictive zoning laws about sex offenders that make it fewer and fewer places they can live?
I mean, I can't speak anything
Yeah.
about that particular case, but there's certainly a balance that needs to be made between an offender who does their time and not putting them in a position that it's so hard for them to live their life that they resort back to
Right.
committing more crimes, especially
Right.
if they're going back to committing crimes against children. Federally, there's a lot of work to do to make sure that, the states do a lot of their own like sex offender registration, and federally there's just steps to make sure that it can be followed state to state and also country to internationally. In terms of what the solution is, I'm not sure I can speak to that, but
Yeah.
there's definitely that balance for someone who has done their time, but also there's a reason that these sex offender registration laws exist, and the recidivism rate for sex offenses is extreme. And so there's certainly reasons for the restrictions to be there, but at the same time, if they're going to be pushing people to just commit the crimes again, that's certainly not a solution.
In the academic crime world that I know, the scholars of criminal law do not think that the recidivism rate is exceptionally high for sex offenders. But what Anna Salter, if you know who she is, Anna Salter works with sex offenders in the prison system in Wisconsin. She always says it's the getting caught rate is low. That's not the same as the reoffense rate,
Yes.
right? But the getting caught rate actually is not really high. It's sort of surprisingly low and is very consistent with other crimes. But I think that doesn't mean they're not reoffending. So, Denise, thoughts about sex offender registries? Are these a good idea? Are they?
Oh, I think they're absolutely a good idea. There's no question the public needs to be notified. And I think there are tiered systems for the sex offender notification
There are,
systems.
yes.
And I think there's still some corrections to be made within that, but they're obviously set up to address, well, they're intended to be set up to address the severity of the crimes, and obviously the notice period be longer for the more serious crimes, and I think that does need some tweaking, but hopefully that will be a work in progress. Probably both up and down, it could use some tweaking. I would support them. I agree with Lauren that it is a balance that needs to be found. It has not yet been found. I do hope that in the initial period of somebody's registration, they're also receiving supports, whether they be federal or state, wherever their conviction originated, so that as they're reintegrating into society, and it's not just that their name is on a registry, but they're also hopefully receiving some supports to reintegrate, for job supports, to help them find some sort of economic support, social supports, family supports, whatever they happen to be. But also, I do think, and probation is set up for this on the state side, it's called supervised release on the federal side, there's a monitoring component for a protection component. So there's a support to the offender, there's a protection to the public, and I think they should work hand in hand. Sometimes I think they work better than others. But that's part of the early part of the sex offender registry. That is also going on as they're also being reintegrated into society. It's a tricky issue.
One of my concerns about the registry is that it gives, in some sense, it may give people a false sense of security, which is they think the sex offenders are on the list. Most sex offenders aren't on the list, right? So you sort of think, oh, I looked in my neighborhood, there aren't any sex offenders.
Yeah, it doesn't
Well,
mean
there aren't any registered ones,
Yes.
right? I mean, there's a way in which that list, if people think that's the universe of sex offenders, they're kind of would be misled, right?
I think it's like that with any crime. I mean,
But
it's
we
not
don't
just
have
the people.
registries for other crimes.
Well, you have criminal histories, though.
But we don't do this. We don't tell neighbors. We don't, I mean, this method we do for sex offenders only. We don't have a bank robber registry or a armed robbery registry and tell neighbors, oh, you have someone on your block committed armed robbery.
Right, because I think the target audience for their crime that they're predisposed to is a bank or a gun
Well,
store.
What if it was assaulting people? I mean, we
Well,
don't
I
have
agree.
a assault registry.
I agree, we don't, but I think there are children everywhere, and I think they are considered one of the most vulnerable, rightly so, of the population, which is what drives part of the decision-making to have the registry. I'm not a scholar as far as what the original origin was of the registry, but I understand the genesis of it, and I understand the reasons for it.
There was an awful case in New Jersey. It was.
No, and it's, like I said, I admit, it's not I don't know the history of it, but I think it is a 100% needed.
Well, I think the tiered systems are the ones that have potential to work well, and the ones that aren't tiered are really problematic because they're treating every single person the same. And we know these people are not all in the same bucket.
Right.
In terms of the sense of security, I mean, it goes back to what we were saying in the beginning of the stranger danger idea is only one component of the threat that's
Yeah,
out there.
right,
I mean, the
right.
person who's on the computer could be anywhere, or the person who's using the apps and the programs, or could be
Yeah.
in this country, another country. And so, yes, there's certainly that need to know that neighborhood, and because of what we've seen of the reoffenses and the vulnerable population of the victims. But there is that vigilance that's still needed for the other offenders, whether the people who have yet to be caught or who are not actually in your geographic zone.
So the Me Too movement is now a year old. How, if at all, do you see any effects of that? And I've continually asked, sort of, is there going to be a Me Too movement for children? I don't think there really is, but do you see a difference in the last year with a more open discussion of these issues at the adult level? Or do you see any change in what you're doing in connection with children?
I
I
don't see any
haven't.
difference.
You don't?
No,
Mm-mm.
still doing.
It might be the nature. I think most of the Me Too disclosures most of them are relating to adult
They are.
actions. So I
But I
think.
guess I'm saying we're sort of talking more. All of a sudden,
Right.
there's more conversation about these issues, and maybe in an accepted and open way. So it's sort of, is that filtering down at all, or do you see any, you don't see any
I haven't seen it
real-
yet.
Yeah.
Not saying it might not. But I also think the nature of the work that, at least that I do, I'm not doing as many hands-on, there's different kind of buckets to what we do federally. There's the child pornography bucket. There are some human trafficking cases, although I don't do them in this district. I've done them in other districts. So the pimping. There's the people who travel or speak online and try and meet up with the kids. What else am I missing? Child pornography, enticement, human trafficking.
Traveling internationally.
Traveling internationally, yeah. So whether it's traveling across state lines or traveling internationally, the sex tourism. The sex tourism, we usually get them, hopefully, in the enticement phase before they meet the kid. But it's still a crime to try and do that. So we aren't seeing the kids who have been abused as much with those cases. With the child pornography cases, most of our cases are not production cases. So you're not meeting the kid who had the hands-on abuse. Some of them we are doing, and I have two or three cases right now in this district where we have production cases. And I have met the kid who has the hands-on abuse. And it's hard. But I think the Me Too movement, and if it trickled down to a littler Me Too movement, Me Too Junior, it would, we're not seeing those as much federally, I guess is what I'm trying to get to. Those would be more on the state side, because we don't have the laws that allow us to do those cases. Because our cases usually are those that involve crossing of state lines, and you can bring us cases if they haven't crossed state lines, if there is technology. Like, for example, the SD card on which the child pornography image was stored was made in China. Federal case. Not kidding, okay? Yeah. So I don't think at least my cases, most of them, wouldn't allow me to see that if it was happening. Most of them. I don't know about you.
I haven't seen any increase with it, no.
Is it fair to ask you anything about the Jeffrey Epstein case? It is in the news as to how this was handled in Florida.
I don't know enough about it.
I mean, this is this very, very wealthy guy who cut an unbelievable deal with the U.S. attorney and served 13 months in a local facility where he got to go home every day. I mean, he got a deal that was unbelievable. And one of the U.S. attorneys is now up for, what, labor secretary, I think, and it's coming out again. You don't know this case?
I don't know the case, no.
Boy, it's in the news a lot right now. Have you heard this? No?
I have not, no.
I've heard the name, but
Yeah,
I know
there was
nothing of
supposed
which
to
I
be-
can speak to.
There was supposed to be a hearing today in Miami where some of these victims were going to talk, and that case got settled apparently this morning. So we've never heard from these 15-year-old girls who I guess there were quite a few of. And this is Alan Dershowitz represented him, and he got an incredible deal that at least, thankfully, some people are still examining years later.
What was the charge? Do you know?
I'm not sure, and it absolutely maybe be in your realm because this involved an island in the Bahamas or something. I don't think that the crimes were in the U.S. Mm-hmm. I think he was, taking people off to some island, but he was clearly seeking out young girls in Miami who were from troubled homes and has a lot of victims. Well, maybe I'll see if anyone here has got a question. If you listened for plenty of time, go ahead.
Hi, my name's Tom Richardson, and I do work for the Providence Public School District, and it's refreshing to hear that you're being extremely proactive, especially with the platforms where these kids are using and getting sucked into trafficking and exploitation. It's refreshing to hear that, and as a retired police officer, I wasn't aware of that, and that's nice to hear. But what do we do as teachers? What are some of the signs that we look for in order to prevent it or make a mandatory notification to our Department of Children, Youth, and Family when we see something like this or when we hear something like this? What are the signs that we should be looking at in terms of a child, or what are some of the red flags that we need to be, able to see or understand?
Do you want to start with that?
Sure.
You're more frontline than we are.
Some of the red flags we always tell people to look out for is just changes in someone's behavior. If you know the child and they're all of a sudden dressing very inappropriate or very much different than they were, hanging out with a different set of people maybe, something that's different about them. If they all of a sudden have an older boyfriend or someone who's, they're skipping class or leaving school and they were always a good student, some kind of change in behavior. Anything like that should be a red flag that something's going on. It may not be trafficking, it may be something different, but it's a red flag nonetheless.
Okay. Thank you.
I know that, as a matter of fact, we had, you had brought some to our attention before, that, you know, somebody was acting inappropriately as far as attempting to leave school grounds and stuff, you know. That's exactly what we're looking for. See something, say something. That was great.
I have one case where it's no one's fault. This victim was groomed in a horrible way, but her grades had dropped. Her friend group had changed. She kept missing the school bus. And there was just this constellation of problems. And I think, unfortunately, they were seen by different people, so no one put it all together. So I think those things, in addition to changes in behavior, like the A student all of a sudden gets D's.
Right, yeah.
Something's going on.
Something's- yeah.
And I mean, it might just be she had a bad day, you know, a bad month or something, but it might be more. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut your question.
Oh, no, I wanted to hear that too. Hi. I'm Amanda Milkovich. I work at the Providence Journal. I've written about some of these cases, including a number by Detective Garcia. I have actually two questions. The first one is you'd specifically mentioned that you're looking at different trends nationally, internationally. I was wondering what those trends are that you're seeing.
I mean, I don't know if I can speak specifically to like this is the trend, but in terms of like one of the things that we're doing is working with our international partners, and because I'm kind of on the trial attorney level, I'm not doing that as much as like some of the rest of my section is doing. But I think that the trends that you see is the change of technology in terms of what offenders are doing, and the change of psyche that takes in the offenders as well as the victims. I mean, the number of images and the age of children, and if you just look at kind of where child pornography started or was just like 30 years ago versus what it is now, and the offenders didn't have an avenue to kind of get together and talk about what's going on, whereas now they have these anonymous platforms that they can get together, share stories, encourage each other, and advance their own agenda, share tips of what they know about law enforcement, and none of that used to exist without the technology that's given them that platform and that environment to do that. And so I think that changes both what's happening on the offender level, but it's also changing what's happening on the victim level too, in terms of the access, and it's just creating bigger risks and bigger opportunities for the offenders.
Do you think, is there more sex tourism, are people doing this more now than they used to?
It's hard to tell, I think, if they're doing it more or we're more aware of it,
Yeah, but
or our
you are-
international
yeah.
relations
Yeah.
are better, and so we're, maybe we are
catching
able
more,
to
but who
catch
knows,
them
yeah,
more.
At the base rate,
Right.
who knows? Yeah.
I mean, there's certainly some of the things that we see certainly just did not have a place to exist before the technology allowed them to do that. I mean, you have like live streaming or webcam, where you're kind of doing sex trafficking by long distance, and that like certainly couldn't have existed before you had the technology to create that. But I think in terms of the actual travel, it's difficult to tell if the numbers are increasing, or we're getting better at identifying it, or our international partners are better at kind of getting us involved or reporting it as well.
Amanda?
Oh, I have one more question, which is, when I see a lot of these cases, they're charging the traffickers, but I don't often see the customers who are essentially, committing, molesting children being charged. Is it difficult when you're prosecuting a case to go after these customers who are actually raping and molesting the children?
I haven't done one in this district. I was previously in the Northern District of California. And I mean, I think you're referring to the Johns, for lack of a better term,
Right,
but yeah.
right.
I've had cases where we've done pimp, I don't want to use the real term for it, the head prostitute, and then also the Johns. I've had no problem charging them before. I can't speak to what happens locally here. I don't know what the state laws would allow or not allow. I think sometimes it's harder to find them because you don't know those that were there historically. The best records are not kept by organizations like this all the time, and you can't always get access to who was in fact responding to some of the ads. But if you're finding somebody and making the direct observation, it wouldn't be a problem.
Okay. How about with you on the state level? Have you been able to charge Johns?
We have charged Johns.
Okay.
Absolutely. And, you know, sometimes, like she said, it's hard to find out who they were because there aren't the best records. And
Right.
if we can find them, we'll charge them, or we'll, you know, use their testimony if maybe we can't prove that they actually did have sex because it could be, you know, years removed. If we can prove that there was at least that communication, maybe we can get them to testify that they were there, they communicated, and this other person was there collecting money, you know? So we
Okay.
might be able to use them in the prosecution of the trafficker.
Thanks.
Yes.
I want to ask a question about community outreach that you discussed earlier, because where I work, you have a lot of parents a lot of kids are from one-parent families. A large percentage of children are from parents and children themselves that are English language learners. And a lot of the parents, some of the parents are working 1 or 2 jobs to support their family. And they're really not knowledgeable about what's going on in their child's life. Okay, and I know you talked about meeting with the community centers, in certain community centers. And I know what our vulnerable children are. We have our DCYF children, we have our kids that have been, and you know, placed at the Rhode Island Training School. We have, you know, a lot of children that are, you know, vulnerable. What is your plan to really get out into the public? A lot of these urban places where parents really don't know what the exploitation issue really is. I mean, a lot of these parents just buy their phones for their kids as pacifiers and don't really realize what the kids are getting into. Okay, because the kid comes to school, they chum up with their peers, some peers know better about technologies than others, and then how can we educate parents who are, you know, English language learners or people of that, you know, I don't know what the word is, population, I should say. How do we continue and, you know, meet that consistently so they know? Because that's the way we're going to get it out. I mean,
It's a good question. That's something that we definitely struggle with. You know, we're right now, I think, you know, our focus is trying to educate as many parents and educators as possible. We try and identify kids that are at higher risk and get them involved in groups like My Life, My Choice, or different organizations where we can have more one-on-one with them, with different people from the community, different people from different social services, and just give them as much information as possible. Let them ask questions. Let them try and figure out, you know, if something is going on that they weren't aware of, you know, and just trying to educate everybody.
thank you.
You're in the public schools, right? Are you in Providence?
I'm in Providence.
Yeah, because I wonder about a completely different problem, which is the parent who has a child at Moses Brown and thinks, well, these things don't happen at Moses Brown, right? Or East Greenwich or Barrington. And do you sort of have sense that problem too, of people who think, well, I know that exists in the world, but it doesn't exist in my world?
I think there needs to be, and this is just, I think there needs to be a lot more control of these in our public school system, in our private school system. Okay, these should not be, these are a distraction for our children. Okay, now can they be utilized in the classroom as long as they're integrated on a smart board where teachers can monitor, you know, these devices and they're working properly on their math or questions or whatever. But at times we have some students who do not respect the digital literacy or the digital responsibility of these in the classroom. And not only does it distract that only child that's caught up in this, but it actually takes away the educational component from the others that are in the classroom. Because I work in the Providence public school system, and everybody says, well, that school system is, let me tell you something, that's a great school system. I will tell you that, okay? The resources that in Providence are there for you to be anything you want to be. Believe me when I tell you, it's there, okay? But I think we need to get more disciplined on this approach right here in our school system. And I think you'll see a change if we do, because you all said it. This is a mini computer. These kids are looking into the World Wide Web where there's all kinds of lurking people, you know, ready to, you know, take advantage of our most vulnerable product in our society. And we need to tighten up on this. The parents need to tighten up on this. because, you know, that's just my professional opinion.
I'd like to ask each of you a personal question that would be of interest to anyone who thinks they'd also like to do this work, which is how you deal with it, and how you deal with both, I guess, the burnout and just the self-care and the difficulty of, you know, looking at these images and talking to these people and dealing with this ugliness. What are your strategies?
Some days are bad days. Some days I go home and cry. I did this work when I initially started as a prosecutor on the state level in Mass, and then I did it for several years when I was in San Francisco, and I took a break. And then I did violent gang work and drug cartel work, which was actually easier. It was, okay. I came back into this world after I moved back to, actually I did it at the end of my time in the Northern District of California when I was in the Oakland office. And then since I moved here, I have found it to be at times harder since I've become a parent because I'm obviously understanding things on a different level. But I also think you have to gain an ability, and I think actually law enforcement officers probably more so than us. I think you have to gain an ability to compartmentalize. And if you can't do this kind of work. You just can't. But that said, and I'm pretty good at that. Like I walk in the door, I kind of just shed it, and I'm like, I'm gonna go play with my kids and just pretend the world doesn't exist. But there are days where I really find it hard. Yeah. And I don't have a solution. Self-care is not my strong suit these days. But you just have to draw the line in your head to be able to do it.
Lauren, what do you do?
I mean, I think what Denise said about compartmentalizing is huge. I mean, you can't do this work if you can't do that. If you can't like go home and if you're constantly thinking, there's certainly some things that stay with you more than others and some things that hit you harder, and often it's the weirdest moment of your day that causes that. But you also, there's times you need to be able to turn it off and not constantly think about it. And I mean, for me, everyone in my section, one of the things I loved about it when I first started learning about it is that all of my managers and supervisors did this work in my position. It's, I think, very difficult to come as like doing a different type of crime and then try and manage the people who are doing this type of work. And so the support system that exists among colleagues is huge, and I think we have a fabulous one in my section, and I think it would be hard to do this work without that. Because you need to be able to talk about your day, and we were talking before this started that discussing this stuff out in the real world ends conversations really quickly. It's hard to just say kind of what you do for a living, and so if you can't do that outside and you don't want to like affect the rest of the world with what you know, that you need someone that you can talk to. And for me, having the support system of fabulous colleagues is what gets that, because I can't go home and talk to my family about what I see during my day. So you need someone that you can talk about it and talk things through.
Yeah, like I leave it at work as much as I can. You know, there's some days, like she said, you can't get it out of your head. But no, it's when I go home, that's my time, and try and shut that all off.
So are you optimistic about the world? Are you pessimistic, or does it vary by day?
This is some of the hardest, most stressful, most aggravating work I've ever done. It is also the most rewarding by far. You know, when you make a difference in a kid's life that's been through something like this, it's amazing.
Are you optimistic, Lauren?
I mean, I'm definitely cynical at a lot of times, but I actually find, I mean, today's world and today's news is very depressing, completely outside of what we do, and so there are times that I actually like if I'm reading the news on the way to work and like seeing something that's happening in the world, like that's more depressing than my day, because my day I know I can do something about that, and I am doing something about that, and I'm rewarded. Like there's the rewarding aspect of doing something about that. Whereas when you're reading a news story of something horrible going on, I can't do anything about that, and so there's times that doing my work is actually better than kind of thinking about the other problems that are going on.
Yeah, I think we probably approaches. I'm generally optimistic, but I am a cynical person. I think by nature, even before I was a prosecutor, that's just who I am. But I think you have to be optimistic because I continue to do this job with the hope that what I am doing makes a positive difference. Whether it be in this sort of case or whether it be if somebody was defrauded tons of money and we've tried to get some back or at least get some sort of justice for them. I like to be optimistic that I'm doing something for the community, for individuals. So I think I would trend optimistic.
So would you call the work you do trauma-informed? Does that phrase mean something to you? In
Doesn't.
It doesn't, because in the discussions about Title IX right now, there's, DeVos has suggested some things that are much more defendants' rights oriented, and I think the people that like the current system call it trauma-informed. And that is that it sort of was designed by people who think about what trauma is and how traumatized people act, and have tried to design a process that is informed by that. So I guess I'm interested in sort of what your reaction is to that phrase, trauma-informed. Are you doing trauma-informed work?
I believe so, with the process that we have, the MDT process is with these victims, trying to get them back on their feet and wrap the services around them and get them, absolutely, that is definitely trauma-informed.
Yeah. Lauren?
I mean, I went into this field because I loved the overlap of law and psychology or social work and kind of, and children, they just kind of form this perfect Venn diagram into this world. And I think it's hard to do this work and work with victims if you're not being trauma-informed. You can't just look at it single-handedly. You have to look at the what a victim is going through, the reasons for disclosure when it happens, what happens after disclosure, the trial process for what a victim goes through during that and the aftermath of that. And so there's a lot in this field that I'm not really sure if I am trauma-informed, but that you have to be trauma-informed. You have to keep that in mind.
Yeah?
I don't think I could add anything.
I think you
have
do
a
it.
Sandra?
I wanted to, I guess my question is more toward the children themselves. And I think as far as the work that you do, you've obviously, each of you have seen a lot as it relates to children, unfortunately, as victims and fortunately as survivors. And one of the things that that is of great interest to me is how, as a community, I mean, whether you're a parent or you're the neighbor of a parent, family, the police, people at your church, wherever the community. What can we do to make a child feel comfortable about their own instincts and their own sense of awareness? Because children sometimes sense and know that something's not quite right around them. And I want to kind of expand this a little bit more. I think because of this age of technology, I really understood some of the questioning and the comments made around this age we live in with the technology, this high sense of everything's technology and everything's technology based. I think in the past, I'm sure that regardless of what generation you're in, children have come up to their parents or gone to a teacher to try to explain something horrible that was happening to them, and they didn't have the words for it, either because I'm not a cop or anything, but I'm going to say the perpetrator or the perp. The perpetrator or whoever the person was that was making them feel uncomfortable was doing something to intimidate them or doing something that scared them where they couldn't really express what had actually happened or just whatever it was that was making them uncomfortable. And I think in this age of technology, I'm wondering if that's gotten worse. And quite frankly, part of me feels and believes that it has. I mean, technology, if you walk into a room where there's lots of technology, I mean, it can actually make you feel, I mean, you can physically almost feel a difference from being in a room where there's tons of technology versus walking outside or being in a room where there's no technology or being where there's a lot of nature. And I'm certain, just based on things I've seen in the media, there are a lot of crimes against children, women. It's used in trafficking. It's used in all types of things, even forced labor. technology, you know. And whether it's a child or a young person, a student at a university, or a woman or man or anyone is faced with being attacked or having something happen to them, and they want to speak up, but they have a hard time explaining what has happened because of the way the person is intimidating them. And I really wonder if that's happening a lot to children. And if you've seen that in your work, that children have actually made an effort to speak up, and there's been difficulty in the child to explain what has happened to them. There's an obvious sense of intimidation that's happening to the child. And the reason why I'm asking the question is I just wanted to know from each of you, if you've ever seen that, but I think regardless if it happens or not, which I do believe it does, what can the community do to create a space in our community where children are just listened to? No matter what they say, no one's going to think it's weird. You know what I mean? No one's going to say, well, that doesn't, you know, that's odd. Because there were things that were happening in 1970, 1980, when kids spoke up, people thought they were weird, but today we know what it is. You know, it's not weird. And there's always a first, you know, for everything. And so I guess, you know, as we, with the focus of the discussion, it's on how do we keep our children safe, but how do we help children to trust their own awareness and their own instinct, and how do we create an environment in our neighborhoods where our children can speak up, they feel comfortable speaking up, no matter how weird or uncomfortable, or in some cases, they may not even have the proper language to explain what's happened to them, but they feel, I need to tell somebody something, you know. And I personally, I think it does come with the child trusting their gut, you know. And I just wanted to get your opinion about it. I don't know if you've all have ever experienced that with children that you've helped or in cases that you've dealt with. And then even as attorneys and people that have prosecuted some of these, I mean, these are criminals, these are people that, that have either preyed on children or they have assaulted children. Are there ways these individuals actually intimidate children so that they can't speak up, so they don't have language to report what has happened to them? You know, especially in the age of technology, because I think that is unfortunately a good tool for someone who's preying on children, unfortunately. That's a pretty lengthy question, but I just...
Well, technology definitely has increased access to victims. I mean, they have access 24/7 now that they didn't used to have. There's no safe place away from technology anymore. And I think kids often, most of the time, struggle to put into words what it is that made them feel threatened or uncomfortable, or what exactly happened. I think they struggle with that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, offenders are really good. We've thrown out the term grooming a bunch of getting to that place, building up to that place where the child trusts them enough to do the things that they may not have ordinarily do. If someone comes up to you and tells you immediately, I want you to go do this sexual thing, like a child's not going to necessarily do it right away, but like the offenders are very good at kind of laying down that framework. And I think in the cases that we like in terms sextortion cases where offender is acting like online, it's very easy for them to take on another persona, and so they're acting like another kid and having conversations with them as another kid, pretending that they're going to be the boyfriend or the girlfriend of the person that they're talking online to. They can easily get a picture from somewhere else online and build that relationship, and then get the child to do something or send an image or something like that, and then they use that to hold over them to do more. Like, well, I'll put this on your social media, or I'll send this to your school, or I'm gonna send this to your parents, and you don't want that. And
blackmail, basically.
Right, exactly. And in exchange, send me more stuff and do more things. And technology gives them a platform that's even easier than if you were just having conversations to do that, because it's easy to build that trust, thinking that the person on the other side of the computer is just another kid, and so I can tell this other kid anything, but that's not who's on there.
I'm sorry, you're going to ask him?
I actually wouldn't agree that a child's instinct is perfect in these sorts of circumstances, because I think that envisions that this crime is, and I think there are times where this happens, but that envisions that the crime is, you know, offender meets child, offender takes action with child that's inappropriate or sexual or criminal. Well, anything sexual would be criminal. And I think that's just not the way it typically happens. Does that happen on occasion? Certainly. But I think what typically happens is the grooming, whether it's in-person grooming or online grooming, both of which are vile and both of which are incredibly effective, essentially to compromise or extinguish the child's gut instinct as to right or wrong. And I do think the relationships that develop now online, I think kids have a hard time, teens, and it's preteens even now, have a hard time understanding what's a real relationship and what's not a real relationship, because so many of their interactions are online. As far as, I don't have the 8-ball, the magic 8-ball to figure out what we do in our communities, and it's just not my, you know, it's not my wheelhouse as far as community interaction. But what I have seen be more successful in kids that are able to be pulled out of this quicker is kids that do have parents who are actively involved with them, guardians who are actively involved with them, church members, community members, teachers. It doesn't have to be a parent. It can be someone else who are talking to them or keeping the lines of communication open. As I mentioned earlier, I see social organizations working with children to kind of have children talk openly about things, to kind of take away the shame, you know, take away the secret. I also think parents need to encourage their children not just to talk openly about body parts and about interactions with people. Know who your kids are with. Who do they see every day? Talk about their daycare workers. What's happening? And also to encourage your kids not to keep secrets.
Very good.
Yeah. So all of those, I guess. So.
Of course.
We encourage our kids in school to go to a trusting adult, because any trusting adult. Now, we do have people in place we have psychologists in place that handle this, okay? They offer them, we have a crisis team meeting every Friday. So we do identify potential kids who are in crisis, okay? So our school district has a crisis meeting, okay? And so we really focus on those kids. Now, DCYF has a mandated policy that you have to report. But in the Providence public school system, we encourage that if a kid is reluctant or gets blown off by one person, go to another trusting adult, a basketball coach, maybe a senior, anyone that they can trust, that they can give the information to, that will go where it belongs, so you people can jump all over it. So we encourage that, okay? We encourage that because, you know, kids, you know, if you rat, you know, you're labeled. But we try to encourage them that, you know, based upon what you say to an adult is confidential, and they are, you know, mandated to report it for the basic responsibility of protecting all children. So we encourage and we emphasize to our kids in the school district to go to a trusting adult. If you get blown off by one, go to somebody else until you get it off your chest and it gets in the appropriate agency so it can be resolved.
And I think that's what I was kind of gearing toward, and as it relates to children trusting their instincts and their awareness and creating an environment where they're comfortable speaking up regardless. I think it's a great point if they don't have a trusting adult at home, because some unfortunately don't. If they have a trusting adult somewhere in their life that they can go to, that's important. But it starts with something being created where the child feels comfortable speaking up about anything, regardless of how uncomfortable they feel. And then the last question I have, at least for me, was in your jobs, what have you learned from the people you've prosecuted? Obviously, they've taught you about some of the things. I mean, they obviously were arrested and they're charged and they're convicted, and hopefully during the process they told you something to educate you about the crime so that you can help other victims. Did that happen or did it not happen? Or
I mean, sometimes our cases lead to other cases. We get like, I mean, they have this community among themselves, and so sometimes getting their devices or talking to them will lead you to another offender. I'm not sure they've like educated me in terms of like the world that exists or what they're doing.
The way things are set up, we don't generally.
You don't talk to them.
We don't talk to them. They have an attorney. Their attorney advises them, as is their constitutional right.
Do you know any, as far as in your fields at all, is there a part of their process of being prosecuted and charged where, whether it's a detective or anyone that spends time, you know, asking questions to learn about how they did what they did, and they teach law enforcement, the police, detectives, agents, about their crimes so that obviously their crime doesn't happen anymore, but it educates law enforcement about what to look for so they can prevent this from happening to another child. I mean, I've learned about this a little bit in some of the a conference or two I've been to on trafficking, and former traffickers that have been arrested actually spent time teaching people, you know, prosecutors, detectives, and different investigators about their job, well, not job, but their activity as traffickers. And it helped them. It helped them to find more victims. It helped them to, in some cases, dissolve and destroy all certain cartels and rings that were actually, that's all they do is traffic young people and children. And the reason why these organizations were able to be dissolved and destroyed is because some of the people that were being arrested, obviously they did time in prison or in jail, but they also were in a place where they just were honest about, this is how we did this. This is how we go after young people. I remember in New York City, for example, I believe I learned a lot recently about bus depots, like Port Authority and different places like that, that pimps, you mentioned pimps, that unfortunately traffickers, which I think is equivalent to a pimp, they unfortunately over recent years have targeted those places. I don't know if it's still a problem now, but because other traffickers spoke up when they were arrested and they were honest about what they had done, it educated prosecutors, attorneys, law enforcement, so that they could prevent some of this from happening in the future. And I was just curious if you knew of any of that.
I mean, when they're arrested, we have to read them the rights first, but we obviously speak to them. We try and glean as much information as we can from them. To be honest, I've learned a lot more from their technology than I ever have from them.
Okay.
They generally don't share too much.
Minimize.
I may actually have
They
more,
generally think very highly of themselves, and they don't say too much.
I think I actually have more insight into this because I've spent 15 years volunteering at the prison with sex offenders. So these are ones that are in prison, and they do more talking now, right? They're not, they've lost their case, and they've agreed to go into the sex offender treatment program, right? And one of the things that struck me most about most of the guys that I encountered at the ACI is that they didn't really construct what they did as a crime. They constructed it as love, attention, something, you know, and I listen to guys say, if I ever thought what I was doing would have landed me in here, and you think, well, how could you not think that? But I think, I'm afraid it goes to, you know, it may contradict something that you were saying, Sandra, because the kids they target don't think they're being abused. They're being showered with attention. And they're finding the kid that works for. And they're finding the kid that actually is glad that someone's paying attention to them. And in some way, these aren't kids who think, wait, someone just committed a crime against me, who do I tell? These are kids who think, wow, someone's finally paying attention to me. And they think, and maybe there's a discomfort that there's a piece of that they're not entirely comfortable with, but on balance, they are comfortable with it, and that's why it succeeds. And I think we just, you know, that's my insight, is that there's a small group of people that are sort of the evil, they're doing it to, you know, the sadistic one, or the one, you know, there's people that are really evil, but these I think a lot of these guys present in a much different way. And I think that the way that they're successful in grooming is a way that constructs everything as in a positive way. And they really think they think that what they did was loving.
Do you find most of those individuals that you talk to, they're victims themselves? They were victims of sexual abuse themselves?
Some were and some weren't. It's, you know, and as someone who was victimized as a kid, I'm always sort of sensitive to that as a general thought, because I think there is this notion that, you know, people who are abused as kids become abusers. I think it's a contributing factor. But there were plenty of guys out there that did not have victimization in their histories. But there were also, I mean, the first day I went out there, there's a guy who had committed his crimes against 13-year-olds. And then he was sort of realizing in group that, you know, this thing happened to him when he was 13. And he was wondering if they're connected. You know, I was like, well, of course they're connected. So you do see people playing out what happened to them as kids. But I also saw people that had none of that in their background, who were, who were coaches at Brown, or who graduated from PC, or who grew up in Barrington. And those people were there too. And who, and not that abuse doesn't happen in Barrington, but who came from Barrington and from a family that they presented as a perfectly, fine family. So it's both.
And one other comment, I mean, for the prosecutors and for the police officer, you're not going to plea bargain with these people anyways.
Most of the cases resolve.
If you're building a case and you gut them by your case, there's going to be no plea bargain because they you really don't have to.
That's not true. Most of them resolve by plea.
They will.
Most of them are solved by plea.
Most cases resolve by plea,
Yeah.
at least federally.
State too.
Yeah, I mean,
And that's, there's a couple of aspects to that. A big one is the victims don't have to be re-victimized by cross-examination and a trial and the whole process. So, I mean, it's not just that we want the case over or.
Right.
Yeah,
Well, the point I'm trying to make was relevant to her question because she asked if any of those individuals would come out and teach others in the community in terms of why they did it or how to avoid it. My point being is that what I'm trying to say is to answer her question is you're not making any plea bargains with these people once you build the evidence. You're not going to say, hey, listen, if you go out and talk to the school kids in the Providence Public School District, we'll knock off 10 years.
That would not happen.
Okay, that's the point. That's the point I'm trying to make. That's the point I'm trying to make.
I mean, I guess,
are.
I think that the public perception of a plea bargain is not inherently an evil vehicle.
Right.
A plea bargain can resolve a case in a positive way. I think probably the defendant's not happy that he's going to jail, but it's a positive way from what the outcome could be for him. It's a positive way from us that we do see some justice. We see the end of a case. We see a victim not needing to take the stand. And it's an appropriate use of resources because if we are able to successfully and appropriately resolve a case, we then can dedicate resources to the next one. As far as speaking to people in these sorts of cases, I have had a small fraction compared to my other type of cases where somebody would be willing to cooperate with us and they'll come in and they'll talk to us under various vehicles. I haven't found it to be particularly useful. I think the technology, sometimes they have been truthful, sometimes they have not, sometimes they have minimized, sometimes they've rationalized. I think what is the better source of information and training for us has been the victims, the hard evidence, whether it be computer-based or non-computer-based. And just from a process standpoint, just speaking to Sandra's question, is it's not, if we're lucky, they may, after being advised of their rights, speak to us, and they may provide us some truthful, accurate information. But we don't need that information to make the case. That's gravy, usually, because we would not make a case just based on somebody's confession. We would always need corroborating evidence to go forward. So I don't look at what they provide me as a teaching tool. It's insight, it's information. It will certainly enhance or inform my case, and it may enhance or inform how I view an appropriate sentence, because I do look at the person, not just the crime. But I haven't seen a case where I've wanted to speak to someone, and frankly, their attorneys wouldn't let them if the case was ongoing. And if I was in the attorney's shoes, I wouldn't let them either. It's nothing good's going to come of that for them.
Yeah, because I was thinking, like the point that Ross made at one of the conferences I went to on human trafficking. They learned a lot from a particular trafficker who actually said some of what you said in regards to what they look for when they target a girl. They look for girls with low esteem, who look like they're isolated, they have no friends. And he talked about if they went to a mall, what type of young girl they thought was an easy target for them, just simply based on how the young girl responded to a compliment. Like little things like that. And I think that educated so many people, not only educators and law enforcement and people who are prosecuting these people, but as a parent, I would think it would teach you a lot about possibly building confidence in your children or whatever is needed. But I think that individual just taught people a lot, just from educating them about what they look for when they target a young child. So that was more of my question. But we have about...
Yes, we had said we were going to go till 7:30, so I think I'll just give each person a chance to say whatever it is that they thought that, that they think they would still like to add that I didn't ask you or you think is important to add.
I was going to say.
No? Really? Come on.
I can't think of anything else I need to add.
Okay.
Yeah.
Unless somebody else has a question in closing it. Yeah, no.
Then Sandra, I think that wraps it up. You
Okay.
can,
Well, I want to thank everyone for being here. I really want to thank Ross, Detective Garcia, Lauren, and Denise for their time. I think this is, again, a very important subject, very important topic that really should not end here. And hopefully the things that we've talked about today, we can take into our community. Well, thank you so much.
thank
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.